Well, we're going to begin by breaking news, queering up breaking news. Did Governor Ron DeSantis and the Florida GOP supermajority end drag queens and gay pride celebrations with today's new law? Today, the Florida legislature is debating FS 827.11. It may be the most anti-LGBTQ plus legislation in American history, at least since the Stonewall Riots in 1969. The language of the law will define live performance to a standard that virtually would make drag queen performance impossible in Florida in its current format. This is a very complicated story, and we encourage you to follow closely as the law is designed on a very legal basis to ban drag queens, force gay pride organizations to ban drag or cancel their events, and will affect every bar, restaurant, hotel, and event in Florida that hosts an event with a drag queen, whether children or alcohol are present or not.
827.11 defines, quote, adult live performance means any show, exhibition, or other presentation in front of a live audience which, in whole or in part, depicts or simulates nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, or specific sexual activities as those terms are defined in existing law, lewd conduct, or the lewd exposure of prosthetic or imitation genitals or breasts.
The definition of this live performance continues to define predominantly appeals to a prurient, shameful or morbid interest, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community of this state, end quote. This incredibly vague standard is hinged on a Supreme Court decision defining prurient. We will explain that definition in a moment, but this is a key component that will set this statute, if passed, to survive state and even a federal constitutional challenge.
Today's 827.11 continues, quote, by saying, as a whole, with respect to what is suitable material or conduct for the age of the child present, and taken as a whole, is without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for the age of the child present, end quote. This definition in the law will allow any enforcement interpretation to remove the legal defense of artistic or other value and will use the Supreme Court decision defining prurient standard as that may overcome even a constitutional First Amendment defense.
827.11 has virtual certainty of passing because of the GOP supermajority in the Florida legislature and the desires of Governor Ron DeSantis. Critics bring attention to how insidious the law's introduction is today. Prurient is a 1984 Supreme Court case, Brockett versus Spokane decision. The ruling decided that the term prurient was not overbroad in interpretation and is not constitutionally overbroad. The GOP framers of this law have specifically defined drag ban using the constitutionally protected term prurient directly in this legislation. It was likely designed to prevent legal court challenges.
In the decision, prurient was defined as, quote, that which incites lasciviousness or lust, obscenity, lewd, obscene materials, and creates longing, end quote. This interpretation was supported by 1957's Roth versus United States and 1973's Miller versus California to further define state criminal statutes governing obscenity. One part of the test adopted by the court requires that in order to be found obscene, the materials in question must appeal to the prurient interest in sex. The Florida legislature will defend today's law as drag queens, with their breastplates, exotic makeup, wigs, and costumes, are an inherent sexual experience.
Worse, the Court of Appeals invoked the overbreadth doctrine to invalidate other state statutes before the state courts even had an opportunity to apply and construe that law. Using this prurient interest approach could interfere with the enactment as well as the enforcement of both federal and state obscenity legislation.
Finally, the court found that lewd is synonymous with obscene matter. And that means any matter which the average person, applying contemporary community standards, would find, when considered as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest, and which explicitly depicts or describes patently offensive representations or depictions of, ultimate sexual acts, normal or perverted, actual or simulated, or masturbation, fellatio, cunnilingus, bestiality, excretory functions, or lewd exhibition of the genitals or genital area, including artificial representation.
This is likely why the Hyatt Regency Miami case focused on the alleged simulated sexual acts by drag queens and justified today's legislation. On this matter, the court ruled, quote, and which, when considered as a whole and in the context in which it is used, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, end quote. So, the legislation introduced and debated today sets up a Supreme Court standard and redefines it against drag queens.
Today's legislation is designed to balance and prevent legal constitutional challenges, even from the First Amendment. The court cites New York versus Ferber in 1982 as the traditional rule is that, quote, a person to whom a statute may constitutionally be applied may not challenge that statute on the ground that it may conceivably be applied unconstitutionally to others in situations not before the court, end quote. The First Amendment overbreadth doctrine, therefore, is a limited exception to this rule. It permits a party whose actions are not immune from punishment under a properly drafted law to challenge the constitutionality of the law of a, quote, sweeping statute or one incapable of limitation, end quote. In other words, prurient interest may be a court dog whistle for this ban to survive legal challenges. Today is a dramatic moment in Florida.
That's a lot to digest, Al.
It is very...
And it's scary.
Complicated from the standpoint of making sure that we try to walk through what the legislature is doing. This amendment that takes place and goes to the floor at about 1:30 this afternoon has virtually no chance of not passing. They have a supermajority that can do whatever they want. There's no stopping it if they decide we're going to pass this. All of the dog whistles of the way this amendment is written is to make it constitutional, to fight off challenge, to get a Supreme Court to say First Amendment rights in terms of free speech do not trump this local community standard of the citizens of the state of Florida, and to win this battle. The prurient standard is specifically quoted in the statute, which is the dog whistle of the Supreme Court's decision to define obscenity. And so as a result, what happens here is, unlike the challenges that we've seen so far, our house, Broward Center, Hyatt Miami, Orlando, etc., this, if passed, would essentially prevent the possibility of being in drag, because breastplates are innately designed to be sexual in nature, and as a result, with violation of this law. And they preempt the argument that it's an art form. We've talked about this repeatedly. I've said over and over again, it can't survive a Supreme Court speech challenge until they do this.
So, Al, so then what happens to Miami Beach Pride, Stonewall, gay prom that's coming up? All these things include drag queens.
They're dividing and conquering and winning by their dividing and conquering our community. Tampa Pride gave us the first clue of this over the weekend when their president, Kerry West, said, I'm concerned if we're going to be able to do Pride again in Tampa. When he was blowing that dog whistle, it wasn't as clear to me of what he really meant. And now it's clear to me in this amendment that was launched today. Because what this law will do is make a Pride organization, a restaurant, like our house, a bar, like the Pub or Georgie's Alibi, or the Palace on South Beach, make the decision, I'm going to operate without drag queens, or I'm not going to operate. And as a result, if this passes, there's going to be a very liberal interpretation of enforcement of this law to say that you're in violation of this state law. And as a result, a Pride organization will have to decide, we are going to stand with drag or we're going to cancel our Pride event.
Well, obviously, we have to stand with drag. You're right. They're trying to divide us. They're trying to conquer us. They're trying to get us to drop the T from LGBTQ. They're trying to say, well, okay, we can keep your gay sports bar, but you're going to have to close Lips, or you're going to have to close the pub. And then, of course, next they will come for Gym Bar or drink.
For the first time, I tell you today, I apologize for interrupting you. I have heard Scott Galvin at Safe Schools say repeatedly over the last 5 or 6 months, y'all, they're going to eventually come right into our bars. They're going to eventually come right after LGBT. Today is the first day where the lights go on for me that this is insidious.
Yeah.
Because the nature of how they've written this law is using a constitutional, already decided justification of prurient interest, connecting it to sexuality and the obscenity of sexuality in public, and saying it doesn't meet community interest because this is what the community broadly thinks. It doesn't meet artistic or scientific value, so you can't fight the law or the legislation on those grounds, and the individual state courts can't reinterpret what we've done on this using settled law that'll be challenged, but settled law. And finally, it is not a First Amendment constitutional fight.
Well, here's the thing. We are at the point now where dressing in drag is political speech. That's what it is. That's the defense we can make. We could all get up in our finest frocks and go to Tallahassee and march, be arrested, and we should be able to make a case, hopefully, that this is political. The Stonewall Riots were political. And quite frankly, we're at the place where we could be risking a riot again. Because if the city, and I'm just putting out there, if the city of Fort Lauderdale decides we're not going to issue the permit because we don't want to have the fight with the governor, then we should put a call out that every single gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, everyone, queer, come out in drag, march, and take over the street the third weekend of June. Now, obviously, it wouldn't affect this year. This is a fight that we'll have next Pride season. But
it doesn't affect this Pride season.
It would likely not go into effect until July 1st.
Yeah, it wouldn't go into effect until.
Well, this doesn't just affect, the law is not written so that it's just drag or the queer community. Anything, I mean, Miami, Fort Lauderdale is a hot spot for all these Latino artists to come in to do shows. There's cabaret venues. So my only hope, I think, legally, which I didn't have time to research this, was the unequal enforcement, which is, I'm sure that they're going to be issuing these stays or injunctions towards drag bars. But if they're not doing it towards all the other Miami nightlife, then there is a case to be had with that.
And it does go beyond, the gay scene and gay bars and restaurants, because, you have Faena in Miami Beach that has a cabaret theater. There's tons of cabaret theaters in South Florida. And Faye and I went to go see the cabaret show there, and we were probably the only queer people in the audience.
Yep.
It was full of very wealthy, tourists and residents of Miami Beach that were there.
And all the performers were half naked.
Right. And it was more sexual than any drag show that I've ever been to. But even further than that, now it's part of the arts. And, I've been fortunate to sit on the National Endowment for the Arts for the state of Florida, and see grants that come across for Pride festivals and, things of that nature for years to come, and it's very shocking because not only for, beyond Prides, this affects Broadway. Mrs. Doubtfire is about to take off and do a national tour, from New York. Opera, there's a lot of different art forms that have drag in, part of their theater. So I'm very curious to see where this goes. And then also very shocked that politicians are making this, their, thing that they're going to be remembered for, is that their attack on drag queens.
That's so sad.
We've seen the outcome of this. We watch it in our television, and it's called Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Florida. in 2023.
Well, I mean, and what do we want? Do we want
Who's
a
going
state
to run for president of the United States next?
Ron DeSantis. So are people going to go take the streets? Are we going to stop traffic? Are we going to do all this stuff? Because this is what I told my wife, and my wife responds, the Cuban, right? She's like, no one cares about us, Faye. No one is going to go out into the streets and protest. No one cares. And that hit me like a ton of bricks to hear that from my own wife. She truly believes that we don't care enough and we're not going to make anything of this.
The debate was this afternoon at 1:30. And we are doing 20 minutes as breaking news on this show. Are we going to do something about it? We absolutely are.
We have to.
Well, this is where the allies come in. You know, everyone who's had a bachelorette party at Lips or Palace, you know, all the tourists that have come here, this is the time we need everyone else to come out and support us now.
The definition today is insidious because think of it this way. They are tagging to the prurient interest standard of the Supreme Court and saying it becomes lewd and lascivious and sexual. And how are we going to thread the needle when your artistic and scientific value is preempted by the law because the community standard says this does not meet artistic and scientific value, to say that the drag queen who is in a breastplate, at the minimum, wig, dress, makeup, etc., is not designed to titillate in some way. How do we make that argument? Because if we can't make that argument, they will be in violation of the law. And once that is established, drag is over.
Well, the thing is, everything is titillating. Someone is titillated by everything. I can put my thumb up here on my nose. Someone out there watching is going to go, oh, give me some more thumb action. Like, everything can be titillating. Sex is everything. Sex is life. Sex is death. Sex is fun. Sex is challenging.
The one relation, and I'm curious to your response to it, because one of the things that I and many of our anchors have continued to say is, wait, are you going to ban Hooters? Hooters would not be banned under this standard. First off, it's not artificial. Drag is artificial.
It doesn't need to be artificial under this ban.
Under the ban, the idea is that under community standard, you're violating the lewd and lascivious and sexual nature. Hooters will not be defined by the broad community as lewd and lascivious under this standard. Drag queens will be because of the breastplates and the makeup and the male gender, theoretically, or the trans identity of the drag queen. And a server at Hooters will not rise to this standard.
Well, then we need to write legislation that includes breast augmentation then.
Yeah, what if...
That's artificial.
That's artificial.
Yeah,
Sure.
a plus-sized man at the beach walks around in a Speedo. He has moobs.
You know,
you put a dress on him? Is that now illegal? Is he going to be cited? I mean, I'm not saying. I don't know. I'm just saying these are all questions.
How far will it go?
How far is it going to go? And given the fascist mentality in Tallahassee, it's going to go pretty far.
It's going to. And one last thought, and we do have to move on. The extent of how far they're willing to go versus how does our house stand up to this? How does the pub stand up to this?
How does Lips stand up to this?
How does Lips stand up to this?
Which is predominantly seen straight people are in there.
Exactly. How does the drag queen stand up to this?
That's their livelihood.
The moment the state targets, I won't even use a name, X name, how do they stand up to this? This is an insidious day in Florida.
Can I make one more plea? Donate to HRC. Donate to Task Force. Donate to the ACLU, Equality Florida. Donate to them because they are going to be our first and last line of defense on this issue.
Dress and drag and go to work dressed like that.
Yeah, okay. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Lara are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.